Thank you, everybody. And also, I'd like to welcome all of you here today. And for those of you online, also welcome today. And I see there are a number of you who perhaps have come early for the Spiritual Renewal Week we're going to be having in the coming coming week, actually. And welcome to you especially. The reading I'd like to do this morning is, to start us off, is from Whispers from Eternity. It's entitled, Teach Me to Dream Peace with the Poppy Petals. Teach me to descend as raindrops on thirsty soul flowers, showering them with thy nectar name. Teach me to dream with the poppy petal dreams of thy golden light and inner peace. O divine breath, blow with me as the little breath in all men, and as the vast breath of all living things. We live in a very tumultuous time. And I think we're all aware of what I'm speaking about to some degree, the difficulties that we're having outwardly, the world at large, but also I think all of us, we can't help to perhaps be affected by what's going on around us. And I wanted to speak a little bit because the reading today and the affirmations was inner peace, how to maintain that inner peace. But I think a little bit more also, you could say, is needed. We also want to be, particularly in the time, the age, the years that we find ourselves in, we want to be instruments. Make me an instrument of thy peace. We want to have that inner peace so that we can share that inner peace with other people, so that we can make a difference outwardly, we can serve, it's an act of service. And so I'd like to speak a little bit about a lesson or two that I've learned. 56 years, this is, as he's reminded us of. I've learned one or two, I hope, a few lessons. And I'd like to go back in time to a lesson that I learned from Swami Kriyananda when I very first met him. So this goes back many years. And I met him, but in order to tell this story, I also need to put it in context, because that was a time when our country, perhaps the world at large, was going through a very tumultuous time. And in some ways, I think I'm somewhat reminded of that time. And I met Swami Kriyananda in 1968. 1968. Now, if you're from India, you may not know what 1968 represents, but 1968, Martin Luther King was assassinated. 1968, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. 1968, there were riots. There was tumult. There was a great deal of anger in our country. And it was a time of upheaval, and it was a time that I don't think any of us who were alive at that time, and I know many of you were not, but for those old timers and that remember those times, it was that sort of time when it was difficult to feel that sense of peacefulness that we're speaking about, peace of mind, especially if you were a young man who was going to college at that time at the University of California in Berkeley, which I was. And as somewhat of a reputation at that time, but it was a very difficult time. And for me personally, being caught up in that, being caught up in the various movements that were taking place then, it was a time of moral values and difficulty, making moral judgments, what's right, what's wrong, what's dharma, what's not dharma, how do we navigate this, what's the right thing to do. and the emotion that was behind that. And I could see that it was not a time of peace for me, and it was not a time of peace particularly for a lot of people. And I can see echoes of that today. Echoes in the world at large, echoes in our society, and the lessons I learned then, I remember. I remember them quite well. And that was a time when you could say Swami Kriyananda was living in San Francisco at that time, and he was writing his early music, many of the songs. And I remember one of them, very pertinent, you might say, to me at that time. Some of us were taught the slogan, social evils must be slain, but can anger drive out sorrow? How can passion conquer pain? What's the next line? What we need is light. Thank you, I like that clap. And that was where I found myself in 1968. And so I'd like to give a little context to what was going on with me at that time, and then come to the story. I had met the year before, I had the good fortune of meeting a man that I respected, and I imagine very few of you know this man's name, but perhaps if you're from the Palo Alto area, you might know. Do any of you know Kepler's bookstore? There's one hand there, and another few here. Oh, more than I thought. This Kepler's bookstore was started by a very nice man, very good man, Roy Kepler. Now, Roy Kepler was a pacifist, conscientious objector in World War II. He also was one of the founders of KPFA, the public broadcasting station, which was a new concept in those days. And I do believe KPFA was the first one of those at that time. And he was one of the founders of that. And I had a good fortune of coming into contact with and got to know him a little bit, Roy Kepler a little bit, and I learned something from him, and that was impactful for me. He introduced me to Mahatma Gandhi and the writings of Mahatma Gandhi. I mean, I had heard of Mahatma Gandhi, but he introduced me that you should read this, you should learn this, you should, and consequently, I did. I read Gandhi's biography, I read his autobiography, and I was very, very impressed because it spoke to my situation at that time. I was an activist in school, and all that was going on at that time, and it spoke to me. And the one thing that really struck me with Gandhi was a few things, actually, but particularly that phrase that's become somewhat iconic, be the change that you want to see, that you wish for in this world. Be the change. We have to change. And that spoke to me because I was looking for something. I was not particularly happy with my situation because I was in turmoil. These things were happening. But Gandhi spoke of two particular principles that I took as being very important. First was ahimsa. Now, I had thought of Gandhi before that as, you might say, passive resistant, but ahimsa, and as Gandhi explained, is not passive. It's not just letting whatever happens and just accepting it in that way. Ahimsa is dynamic, and at the root of ahimsa is benevolence. Love is the root of ahimsa, to be able to see the God in others, to see the God in others. And if you see that, how can you possibly God hurting God? So that impressed me. And the second was that ahimsa put into practice satyagraha, that truth force, that putting truth into motion is powerful. And that spoke to me because I was active. I wanted to be an activist, and that meant something to me. Well, I began to see if could I possibly put this into motion? What could I do? Be the change that you want to be. And what I thought, well, Mahatma Gandhi was very, he respected Christianity, the life, or certainly the life of Jesus Christ, the teachings of Jesus Christ. And he respected the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. And these were important to him. I thought, well, maybe I should read those. Maybe I should study those. Maybe I should familiarize myself with those. And so consequently, I was introduced to that. And then, of course, once you start going down that, how am I going to make some change to myself? Well, maybe I ought to learn this meditation. Maybe that might be useful too. So I started trying to learn a little bit of meditation, and I met another man who had an influence on me. And now some of you may not recognize this man either, but his name was Eknath Easwaran. Have any of you heard of Eknath Easwaran? See, there's some. Now, Eknath Easwaran at that time was teaching in Berkeley. He was teaching in Berkeley, and he afterwards, in the years subsequent to that, he started what is still, I think, existing, Blue Mountain Meditation Center. It may still be going. It was in north of San Francisco there, in Sonoma County, perhaps, somewhere in that area. And he was a wonderful man, and he would have a meditation once a week on the campus. There was a little chapel on the campus. Ram, I don't know if you remember it, it was upstairs there in the Student Union. And you never visited. And so anyway, but I took a couple of quotes from Eknath Easwaran. When we are at home with ourselves, we are at home everywhere in the world. When we have found peace within ourselves, peace and love follow us wherever we go. Lasting change happens when people see for themselves that a different way of life is more fulfilling than their present one. When they see that a different way of life is more fulfilling than their present one. And this is something Swami has emphasized. Why did he start Ananda? One of the reasons, a different way of life is an answer perhaps to what the needs are of society at large. So it was, with that, I graduated, 68, I graduated, met Swamiji, read the autobiography, met Swamiji, and began to go to his house, because I was very attracted, in San Francisco, for weekly meditation. And this brings me to the story. So you can see it, you set the scene. He would have this meditation, and it was right around the turn of 68 going into 69 in the winter there. There was a demonstration in San Francisco, a march and a demonstration and so on, and it had turned into something of a police riot. I say police riot because it was the police who got out of control, in my humble opinion. And that night, I went to Swamiji's apartment for the meditation. And I showed up, and I was very upset. I guess I was angry, too. A little inwardly angry, righteously angry. And I showed up, and he greeted me. There was some dozen or 15 people there. And I came in, and he says, "Oh, how are you doing tonight, John?" I wasn't Jaya then. And I started to vent. I was going to tell him how I was, which was not good. I was angry. I was emotional. I was upset. And I started going, "Oh, you wouldn't believe, blah, 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 blah." And Swami just stood there. He listened calmly. He says, "Okay." And then, "Well, why don't we come on in?" And it made me angry. He did not validate my upsetness, my anger. He didn't get in there with me, which is what I wanted him to do. I wanted him to say, oh, that's terrible. You know, oh, they shouldn't have done that. And oh, we got to do something about this. No, of course not, he didn't do that. He was peaceful. He says, oh. And he says, well, come in. And then, but I was upset. And I hung on to that being, I said, he doesn't understand. He's one of these guys, you know, they just talk and they don't act, and he's sort of, you might say, my vision of otherworldliness, who's just has no cares for what's happening in this world, and you fill in the blanks. You know, that was how I felt. And so I went home that night, and I didn't go back to him. I thought, that's not for me. I don't think that's for me. You know, that maybe it is. But I just was upset for about 2 weeks. And after about 2-3 weeks, I went back. Fortunately, what was motivating me? Emotion. I was very emotional, very upset. I was confused. I was wanting other people to jump in the pond with me. But fortunately, a little time passes and these emotions go, and I began to think, well, golly, I liked it there. He was a good man. He was, you know, and so I eventually came around. And I came around and I went back, and it was shortly thereafter that I came back, and it was shortly after that he asked me, he says, would you go up into the mountains and help me start a meditation retreat, get that meditation retreat started? And I said, yes. And it was just like right then, yes. And I understood, I have to get out of here. And that was one lesson, a big lesson. I need to make a change. And I was looking, how do you make a change? And the lesson, you could say, change your environment. That was one thing. But also, there was something else. And by coming up, I found that my life changed. And looking back on it, I realized that what happened was I was able to transmute that anger that was festering me, that emotion that was festering me, not just with Swami, but it was just generally discontent. I was able to transmute that into something positive. And this is the point, one of the points that I wanted to make here. You know, Swami even said this in terms, he says, there is a small place for righteous anger. Because a lot of people, when you talk to them about, you know, there's things going on in the world, wouldn't you be angry too, et cetera, et cetera. There's a place for righteous anger, but it's a very dangerous thing. But Swami would say, yes, there is a place for righteous anger, but you have to be very careful. And also, it has to be, because what is anger? Anger is really it's emotion, and it's energy. He says, and sometimes for some people, it's better to be angry than to do nothing. He says, but if you're going to go down that path, you have to transmute that energy into something positive. Otherwise, it will eat you up. And you have to and so this is why it's dangerous. Because how many people transmute the bitterness, they transmute it. But if we as devotees, we feel frustrated sometimes. Things come up, And, you know, and you get, you know, or at least I do sometimes. And I remember Swami that he would say, you got to turn it into something positive. You have to be solution oriented. And he said, if you feel that, those emotions, anytime you're frustrated, you're a little bit upset, why is this happening? Notice it, and then grab it and try to turn it into something. What can I do about it? What is the solution? How can I be a positive counterpoint to that? And there was one, and the danger here is, again, going back to Mr. Eshwar, and he made a very interesting, he had a nice saying, which we need to keep in mind, or at least I've tried to keep it in mind. He said, every angry thought makes it a little easier to get angry the next time, and a little more likely. So this is why it's dangerous there. But think of it in terms of energy. And now people say, well, I don't get angry. But I take it down a step from anger. People find that things are going bad, things aren't working. They begin to complain. Complaining is just anger light. If you trace it, you see it's the exact same thing. I'm angry because things are not the way I want to be. Or something has happened, but you say complain to the same thing. I'm complaining. It's not like I don't want it to be. And to the degree that we complain, what's happened is going to be a little bit easier next time, and much more likely as well. And so the answer here is if you find you complain, I complain, which I do, I try to remember what's the solution. Because our duty as devotees is to transmute that energy. And don't beat yourself up. You know, these things happen. We got all these things. We're living in the life of duality here. Of course we're going to feel these things. Yes, we're going to complain. And sometimes we get, embittered by something. That's okay. If we remember, if we take it, well, maybe it's not saying it's okay, but it happens. And take it to the next step and remember. Transmute it. That's what the devotee does. Okay, what's the solution? How am I going to turn it into something positive? How am I going to answer that? And then you find you become an instrument. You can become an instrument of God's peace. You can become an instrument. We remind ourselves. And I think the spiritual path essentially is a process of constant daily reminding ourselves of who and what we are and who and what we're here doing here. Now, this experience with me and with Swamiji, there was a number of lessons I learned in that, and I wanted to just mention a couple of them. One I mentioned Gandhi already here. He says, but you'll find that in day-to-day life, you get an email. Somebody, maybe they're complaining, something's happening, they're saying something, maybe what even more so, they get an email, they're soliciting your support, your help. Swamiji, I was soliciting Swamiji's support, his help to get in the pond with me. I think if you listen to people and you develop an ear for it, and the ear is in your heart probably, you can tell. If you receive that email, you receive somebody's request for something, what's the vibration? Is it a complaint? Is it angry maybe? Are they being, is there a negative tone to what's being asked of you? If you can learn to feel that, and I've learned, somebody's asking me something very reasonable, but I can tell there's a little bit of motivation of negativity there. Be careful. I just tend to back up. And I thought, gee, that's what Swami did. I won't let anything, this is what Swami would say, I'm quoting, I won't let anything take away my inner peace. And he would watch that, because we can be pulled into vibrations that, and pretty soon our inner peace is gone. Where'd it go? So we have to be able to retain that. And by retaining that inner peace, now it's not like I thought of Swami, oh, he doesn't care. We can care tremendously, but in the right way. We can become a channel. We can become somebody who is able to make an impact in this world in the direction that we want to go. And I think, and I'm going to close with this story of St. Francis. He was, of course, we know his story. He renounced all, went down into the plain there, and he had a vision. God spoke to him, says, rebuild my church. Rebuild my church. And that church, he was there in this rundown church, little that had fallen apart. And he said, oh, and what did he do? He began rebuilding that church, stone by stone. And of course, we look back many years later and we says, well, God was saying something more to him than just rebuilding that church. But that's what was right in front of him, and so that's what he did. But it was even deeper than that. Each of us is being asked to rebuild my church, rebuild your church. It's the church here that needs to be rebuilt. And so each of us, and as St. Francis, he rebuilt that church, which was right in front of us, and then it ended up having a much larger impact than he could have ever foreseen. And I think the same thing is for each of us as well. We're being asked here now, in a very tumultuous, difficult time worldwide, to respond in some way. We could say, oh, I don't want anything to do with that worldly stuff. Yeah. Is that the right response? No, we're being asked to act. We're Kshatriyas. We're being asked to act. But we're disciples, and so act how? We have to act as instruments of peace, instruments of master, and what is it that's being asked of us? Is to bring light, Lord, make me a channel of thy peace. And in that way, we are blessed to have the opportunity. A Kshatriya is blessed to have an opportunity for a righteous battle. And I think all of us, Kshatriyas, were blessed to have an opportunity, a difficult time. Those are the times when we make great spiritual progress, or we can, if we seize the opportunity that's before us. Great benefit can come to us to be able to rise to that challenge, but not in the way that the world thinks of it, not that way, in the anger, bitterness, to rise above those things. And in that way, we then have the potential here we have a group of us together, and we can do, as Mr. S. Warren said, lasting change happens when people see for themselves that a different way of life is more fulfilling than the present one. And we can present, and I think this is what Swami wanted Ananda Village, Ananda communities, the Ananda worldwide, Ananda India, Ananda Assisi, to be a place that demonstrated a higher way to answer the challenges in the world. And I think we, as instruments of that, are blessed. As that is why we said the instrument is blessed by that which flows through it. But what flows through it is our choice. And I think this is what the lessons we learn is we have the choice to let anything, it could be anything that flows through us. We make that choice, and in the process of doing that, we're blessed, and ideally, others are blessed as well. God bless all of you.
Peace gave us the mountains, peace gave us the sky. Nightly when starlight enfolds us, peace is its lullaby.
Strong.